Great. I guess we can get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Soraya. I'm the coordinator for the T1D Huddle. We're very excited to be hosting this session for you tonight. I know a number of people have expressed interest in intermittent fasting. So welcome to the Huddle. We're very lucky to have two special guests tonight who are actually from the Huddle community, Phil and Katie. They will be giving us this, facilitating this session for us. And we'll start with a brief intro to intermittent fasting, a couple facts about its risks and benefits, and so on and so forth. And we'll have a peer discussion. And then afterwards, we'll do a Q&A with Katie. And so before I introduce our guest hosts tonight, I just want to provide some background about the session itself. So we do want to emphasize that the information shared tonight is not meant to provide any kind of clinical guidance. It's meant to open up a discussion around personal experiences and answer your questions around this type of diet. If intermittent fasting is something that you would like to try out, we strongly recommend that you speak with your dietitian first. I also do want to remind everyone that we will be recording this event and audio taping it, so people who aren't able to join us tonight can listen to the recording later on our website. And we kindly ask that everybody mutes their microphone unless they're speaking, and you can do so by clicking the mute button at the bottom left corner of your screen. And if you would like to contribute to the discussion later on during the peer discussion section or the Q&A, you can just click it again to unmute yourself. If we see that there's too much background noise, our team will mute you on our end temporarily. And to make sure that the session runs smoothly, as always, we have a couple ground rules. One person talks at a time. If we find that a discussion around a specific topic goes beyond a reasonable time, I'll give a warning signal so you can wrap up your comment. And just to be respectful of one another and avoid interrupting each other. So without further ado, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our first guest. Phil Powell has been a registered nurse for 7 years. He moved out to BC from Southern Ontario in February this year and is absolutely loving it here, except the rain, I assume. He currently works in the diabetes centers at VGH in St. Paul's Hospital, where he finds the work extremely fulfilling and takes enormous joy in being able to emotionally and medically support other people living with diabetes. This year is Phil's 20th year living with type 1, and he was diagnosed when he was 14. He's always been very active, wrestling and playing football throughout high school, getting into rock climbing, tennis, weightlifting in university, and more recently, being interested in squash, powerlifting, hiking, and cycling. Hypoglycemia has been a persistent issue throughout all of this, and no matter how many endocrinologists Phil saw, nobody seemed to have the solution for what worked for him. 3 years ago, he switched to an Omnipod Plus Dexcom system, which was a complete game changer for him for reducing hypos. However, even still, lows with high-intensity exercise often felt unavoidable. For him, the final key to minimizing these lows came when he transitioned to a low-carb diet and time-restricted eating. He found reducing the frequency of insulin dosing as well as the total amount of insulin he took greatly improved his glycemic control. While this isn't a widely supported approach to diabetes management, we know that many people with diabetes are experimenting with intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating on their own. Phil is hoping that through sharing his experiences, he can help to ensure anyone planning on trying this approach to nutritional management can do so safely. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, that's me in a bubble. Like Sarai had said, I am absolutely into low carb eating, into intermittent fasting, and some of these things that are more on the periphery of what diabetes care is. When I had originally proposed this talk to Tricia, saying I have an interest in this, I had reached out to dietitians, and I couldn't even find a dietitian who would back this. So maybe that speaks to how much on the fringe of diabetes this care is. But for me, I can't imagine ever going back. This has been absolutely critical to good diabetic control for me. And we know people are experimenting with this on their own. So I'm hoping by providing a bit of a background, I've got a presentation to give to you guys that kind of goes over some of the basics of it, that at least if you're thinking about doing this on your own, that you can go about it safely. So yeah, I will share my screen and go through this. All right, can everybody see everything there? All right, wonderful. Okay. So just a quick preamble. Fasting as a practice in general is not very well researched. It's gaining a lot of popularity, but the research that is out there exists mostly on people that are not diabetic at all or on type 2 diabetic populations. For type 1, almost none at all. So this is really and truly the Wild West in terms of scientific backing for this. So know going into this that, you know, the advice I'm providing you is based around conversations I've had with other dietitians, through my own experience, and through reading studies on type 2 diabetes and the little bit of literature that's out there. Anytime you're changing anything in your diet, it can impact your medications, most specifically your insulin. I'm sure everybody knows that. So talk to your diabetic team. It's really important that they know what's going on with you and that they can have a conversation beforehand on how to safely adjust your medications if this is something that you're going to look at. And then the biggest point is always be safe. A lot of people get into these kind of dietary, trying different things with their diet. And they get so hooked on trying to do it that they forget that the goal is being safe and being healthy. So if you're trying fasting and your blood sugar goes low, absolutely you can treat it. Absolutely you have to treat it. You can always fast another day. So I would say if you have a low blood sugar when you're doing this, treat it. There's always more days, and the biggest thing is just be safe. So first off, what is fasting? So it's a voluntary abstinence from food for spiritual, health, or other reasons. This is compared with starvation, which would be when you don't have food, but you would like to have it, the involuntary kind of absence of food. So fasting has become significantly more popular recently because there's kind of this growing belief that it will benefit your health in some ways, and I'll get into that a little bit further as we go. Kind of the nitty gritty of some terms. So what everybody has probably heard of more recently is intermittent fasting. So this refers to periods of fasting and periods of eating. And those are referred to as your fasting window and your feeding window. And you might ask, well, isn't just any time you're not eating fasting? Well, no. So it tends to be defined as it only counts as fasting if your fasting window is at least 12 hours. And this can extend. People do multi-day fasting, but at least 12 hours for your fasting window. And it may or may not involve reducing the number of calories that you consume. The form that I tend to promote for most people who are interested in doing this, and the form that tends to be most popular, is something called time-restricted eating. If you've ever heard of like a 16-8 fast, that's what this is. So time-restricted eating refers to not reducing the number of calories you eat necessarily, but just having your calories condensed into a smaller period in the day. So, rather than eating over from say 7 in the morning until 7 at night, you would just say have an 8-hour eating window or a 10-hour eating window. In terms of diabetes, this is a much safer way to go about it if you are interested in it. So if you're curious about this, this is, in my opinion, the way to start, because the longer your fasting window is, the greater the complexity in terms of medical risk, and certainly with regards to diabetes becomes more and more complex. So yeah, there's many types of intermittent fasting. Like any kind of nutritional plan out there, there's not one size that fits all. So people do 24-hour fasts. So this would be having no calories in a 24-hour period. OMAD, so this stands for 1 meal a day. This would be condensing all of your calories down into a single meal. So you would only eat over, say, a 1 or a 2-hour period. 16-8. This is kind of the most popular one, which is 16 hours of fasting when you're not eating, and then 8 hours when you're actually eating. 5-2 fasts. This would be you eat normally 5 days a week, 2 days a week are your fasting days. So sometimes these are combined. You'll do like a Saturday, Sunday. Sometimes people will split it up and do like one fasting day midweek and one fasting day end of the week. And then there's a few other types, and I'm not going to go into them too much because for the most part, I'm going to try and keep my talk focused around time restricted eating, as this is the most common. And I think kind of the easiest start into intermittent fasting, if that's something that you're interested in. So why would anybody do this? Why would you give up food? The idea behind it is the more often you eat, the more often you're having these kind of glycemic excursions. Every time you're having a meal, your blood sugar is coming up. In a non-diabetic population, your body would naturally release insulin. For us type 1 diabeticos, this would be when you bolus your insulin. So similarly, you have spikes in insulin in your body. And part of what insulin does is control the amount of sugar in your blood, but there are other effects to it as well. And there's a belief, at least among the community who promote fasting, that that having high insulin levels throughout the day may have deleterious effects as well. So this graph that you're seeing is kind of an example of what a typical day would look like. You have your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as snacks in between. And we know lots of people, their diet kind of conforms to this, which would be eating about 4 to 6 times a day. Contrast that with what would be closer to a 16-8 intermittent fast. You just have these longer periods where there's no change in your blood sugar. For me, this is incredibly valuable. I don't know about you guys, but I find all the carb counting to be mentally fatiguing. I find the most chaotic parts of my diabetes are trying to match insulin to how much I ate. So for me, it became much, much simpler to condense things down and just have these long periods where my body was rested. It felt good. And it kind of led to better diabetic control for me, as well as reduced hypoglycemia. I'm not going to delve into these too much. This is more, we're going to put the slides up afterwards for people, but kind of goes through the physiology of what happens in your body when you eat a meal, which is you have immediate glucose that comes from the food that your body uses for energy. As time goes on, your body will tap into its glycogen stores and use those for energy. And then as time goes on further and further, your body actually has an ability to make its own sugar through breaking down proteins and fats. And this is referred to as gluconeogenesis. But as this is just kind of an introduction to fasting, I'm not going to go too far into this. If you feel like you'd like additional resources, contact me, and I'm happy to provide kind of more information on this. And this is just a quick description of the previous slides. So who can fast? Really and truly, the answer is most people, and we're seeing this in the research, and people are doing quite well with it, the ones who are attempting it. There are groups, though, that we just don't know if it's safe for. So in the meantime, we say, probably best not to attempt this diet. Any women who are currently pregnant or looking to conceive and may not be aware that they're already pregnant, they have significantly higher kind of energy requirements. There's growth in their body, and we just don't know whether it's safe for them. So I don't think that's a good idea for them. And most professionals, even clinics who promote this, say, yeah, it's best to avoid with that. Children and adolescents are kind of the same. They're growing. There's lots of change in your body, and we just don't know if it's safe. If you're underweight, that can sometimes be concerning. Intermittent fasting is not necessarily associated with weight loss, but in some people, they do find they lose weight on it. So if your weight is already low, might be a higher risk to do so, and maybe not the best idea. Disordered eating history. Eating is so emotional. And I think anytime you're restricting the periods in which you're allowed to eat, you're opening up a window there for possibly falling back into these disordered patterns. So I would say approach with a lot of caution, and in general, probably not a good idea for people who have a history of disordered eating. And then finally, poorly controlled diabetes. For the most part, with intermittent fasting, the goal is not to produce ketones, but if you're somebody who has recurrent diabetic ketoacidosis, if your blood sugars are wildly out of control, I don't think this is the time to experiment with this diet, because it is more complicated. I would not describe this as a basic part of diabetic management. I would say this is a more advanced step that requires some understanding of your own body and how your meds affect it, and your eating and how that interacts with your insulin. Outside of that, most other people can fast. There are some cautionary points. So people with diabetes, primarily because of the medications you're on that would lower your blood sugar. When you're not eating, obviously you can't be taking insulin during that time, not your fast-acting insulin anyway. So you need to talk to your medical team about how you're going to approach medically this varied diet. Additionally, for longer fasts, your insulin sensitivity can change. So that adds a whole other dynamic to what this is. As far as prescription meds go, the primary things are meds that affect your blood pressure. There's been more and more studies coming out showing that people have improved blood pressure, meaning lowered blood pressure, with intermittent fasting. So if you're on prescription meds that are like medicinally lower your blood pressure, you may want to talk with your team about this beforehand, because you might be at risk of going too low. I'm not going to go into the medical side of it, but if you have issues with gout or high uric acid, this can also exacerbate that. And then finally, people who have kind of more advanced liver, kidney, and heart disease. There's evidence showing that these are the populations that this can be of most benefit to, but there are also more considerations with regards to managing diet in these populations. So the same rule kind of applies to everybody, which is talk to your medical team, talk to your dietitian. They're going to be the ones who know the best how to guide you through this if this is something that you're going to try. So a lot of negative things I've said so far. Why do people do this? One of the biggest reasons is it's just a simple, convenient, kind of flexible way of managing both nutrition and diabetes. Nutritional change involves a lot of learning, especially these time-restricted eating fasting windows. It's much quicker to implement in terms of you don't have to learn all about different food groups and stuff. It's widely adaptable. So some people do their 8 hours of eating in the morning versus the evening. And for me personally, I found it quite convenient to be able to eat fewer hours in the day. When I wake up in the morning, I don't have to worry about breakfast. I don't eat till noon most of the time. So I found it really simplified my life, especially with travel. And it's quite adaptable in a number of different ways, as I kind of had up on my posts earlier about the different types. Mental clarity. A lot of people report this, and there's not actually good research to associate or to kind of identify why people are reporting improved mental clarity and concentration. But this seems to be a very widely described phenomenon where people just feel sharper. I know for me, actually, the worst parts of my day are the eating parts of my day. I love not eating, as strange as that might sound, because I feel sharp. I feel amazing. Exercise feels better. Everything in my body feels better when I'm not eating. And this seems to be a very, very widely described phenomenon. Sleep. We know that eating within about 2 hours of sleep is associated with more difficulty falling asleep. So at least by having your eating window and at least 2 hours before bed, people are reporting improved sleep. Reduced hunger. This might sound contradictory. You're reducing the amount of time you're eating. So you think, oh, you must be more hungry. This must be brutal to go through. And widely, people are not reporting this. Your hunger is driven by these hormone cycles through the day. It's not like you're randomly and magically just hungry at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There are actual cycles that your body goes through on a circadian rhythm, which would be like a 24-hour rhythm. And you can shift these so that your body gets used to eating in a different window. So a lot of people find that by shortening the window in which they eat, they're only hungry in those moments. You become trained to only eat during that 8-hour window, and it often becomes a lot easier. Weight loss. I always tell people, don't go into fasting because of weight loss. Evidence does not support that it's effective. Some people have amazing success with it. Other people, not at all. So I think if you set your expectation on, I'm doing this because I want to lose weight, that may or may not happen for you. So I think you have to look at what additional benefits you're looking to kind of reap from this, or at least understand going in that that may not be something that you experience. And then these last couple of points, fasting is associated with improvements in cardiovascular markers in a number of different studies. And it's also being looked at for improvements in decreasing risk of cancer, dementia and Alzheimer's, and just general cardiovascular disease. But what about the diabetics? We're here for diabetes. I think this is where the greatest benefit of intermittent fasting is, which is, I'm sure you guys know from your own practice that eating is chaotic. You eat different foods, you're trying carbohydrate count, you're trying to match your insulin to that. It's, at least for me, the most volatile parts of my day, and that's what I see in my patients as well, which is blood sugars tend to be the most controlled overnight in the 8 hours that you're sleeping. So by extending that window in which you're not eating, there tends to be more stability. And for me and other diabetics who fast that I've spoken with, this tends to kind of translate into less mental energy if you're just eating fewer hours in the day, because you don't have these variations in glucose. For decrease in A1C, this is all within a type 2 population. I've not seen any data within type 1 diabetes. So be aware going in, but it's my suspicion that this would apply similarly, which is you have a longer period in which you're not introducing food, where your body is rested, which in my opinion would likely translate into a lower A1C, but there's not actual research to back that up. And then the biggest point is kind of decreased risk of hypoglycemia. This is going to vary person to person. I found a number of studies in which they reported this, in which type 1 diabetics who fasted actually had lower hypoglycemia, which seems wild when you're thinking, I'm not eating, I should be going low. But really and truly, if your basal insulin is set correctly, it's not meant to manage food. It's meant to just keep your blood sugar steady while you're not eating. So by having a longer period where you're just within this, your basal insulin is managing your sugar. For me, and within these studies, they're actually finding that people are having reduced hypoglycemia. An added factor within this is, I don't know if any of you have experimented with looking at exercise around taking insulin. Often bodies are more prone to hypoglycemia if you've recently taken insulin. So again, kind of depends person to person, but with regards to exercise, sometimes it means lower blood sugars. And certainly for me, that's what it had meant, that by not eating near when I exercised was actually extremely beneficial in terms of reducing these low blood sugars. But what about the bad sides? And there are bad sides to this. There are risks. Otherwise, I think I would have more dietitians interested in joining me in this talk. So the biggest risk with diabetes and fasting or reducing the amount of time that you're eating is hypoglycemia. As much as I just said it reduced it, you are going to see people who their basal insulin is not set correctly, or they become more insulin sensitive. It just may not work for you. And if you're somebody who finds you try this and you're having increased hypoglycemia, chances are it's not the diet for you, and I wouldn't recommend it. This is absolutely not a nutritional plan that is appropriate for everybody. And while some have success on it, it doesn't mean it's the nutritional plan for everybody. Elevated urine ketones. For the most part, you should not be producing ketones if you're just fasting for up to 16 hours. And if you are measuring your urine ketones and finding that you're producing a small amount, usually it's either registered as small or 1.5, that your body's producing too much ketones for that time, and in which case you should probably also not look at fasting, because you might be at higher risk for ketoacidosis. And then kind of the biggest point is just how you feel. If you're doing this and you feel terrible, you're having headaches, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, if your energy levels are low, if you can't concentrate, these are signs that it's not right for you. And as much as you might have read a number of good things about the benefits of fasting, if you don't feel good on it, then it's not the diet for you. I do this and I love this because I feel my best, and my diabetes is my is the best controlled on this diet, but this is not going to be everybody. Other kind of common side effects is when people aren't used to eating in a short period of time, sometimes they find they have headaches, they have dizziness, muscle cramps. Often this is easily solvable by having a little bit of broth with some kind of sodium and potassium in it. But for some people, this is persistent and is a reason that maybe it's not appropriate for you. Overeating might sound crazy, but some people find they have their fasting window, and by the time they're allowed to eat, they've been waiting all day, and it's just been mentally straining for them, and they've been hungry, and then they get to their eating time, and they just blow the bank. They go way too far. They just can't stop consuming calories. So if you're somebody who during your feeding window you're overeating because you were fasting, probably not the right plan for you as well. Nutritional inadequacies. So this is not something you tend to see if you do like a 16-8, where you're still eating calories every day, you're still having protein, there's lots of food. This tends to be something that comes up more in multi-day fasting or prolonged fasting, but can be a risk. And again, talk to your dietitian. They're going to be the people who are able to best advise you on what's most appropriate for you. And then the last thing here is refeeding syndrome. This is something that only comes up for people who are fasting 3 or 4 days, and I would definitely discourage this. This is significantly advanced fasting, and I say this as somebody who I've done 48, 72-hour fasts. It's incredibly complicated. Don't do it. Just start with a short fast if you're interested, because the risk goes up significantly the longer you fast, and the benefits are not necessarily more significant. So you're a diabetic and you're interested in trying this. I would say step one, make sure you're monitoring your blood sugar very frequently. Ideally, have a Dexcom, have a Freestyle Libre. Or if you are on capillary testing, make sure you're testing more often. This is to identify if your blood sugar is starting to go low and kind of, if you're trending towards hypoglycemia, say, I've got to end this fast. I've got to eat now. And just to get a good idea of how your body's reacting to not having food in it for long periods of time. Your basal insulin. Discuss with your team before you jump into this. Really, really important. If your basal is not set correctly, you may end up having significant hypoglycemia. So reading a number of different papers online, common dose reductions tend to be 20 to 50% for fasting periods. So if you're on a pump, this would be reducing your basal by 20% for the time that you're fasting. If you're on a subcutaneous injection, similarly, reducing your dose 20 to 50%. But you need to talk to your endocrinologist about this. He's going to be the one, or she's going to be the one who is able to advise you on what is most appropriate for you to minimize the hypoglycemia. And then kind of the last step with that is make sure your basal is set correctly. So a correct basal it should not be changing more than like 1 to 2 points overnight from when you go to bed. And if you're having your blood glucose change significantly overnight, like an 8-hour period, then you need to look at getting your basal into a better spot before you're even starting to consider fasting. Hypoglycemia awareness. If you have issues with hypoglycemia unawareness, just be aware that there is higher risk to you and that a CGM will be absolutely essential to that. And as I spoke to before, you're in keto testing, and if your body is producing ketones during this, that you need to stop your fast, have some insulin and carbohydrates, and maybe reconsider whether this is the diet for you. So tips for this: start slow. Changing nutrition is incredibly tough. It's emotionally tough. It's physically tough. If you're interested in trying this, I would say start with a 12-12, 12 hours of fasting, 12 hours of eating, and see how you feel. If your sugars are doing poorly, having hypoglycemia, if your body feels bad, it's probably not for you. And I think slowly going into this is the way to ensure that you are safest. Talk to your dietitian. Again, I can't say this enough. Make sure you're talking to your medical team. Dietary deficiencies or nutritional deficiencies are not as big a deal with like a 16-8 fast. More of an issue if you're doing some of these longer fasts, but still definitely talk to your dietitian. Make sure you're well hydrated. Just because you're fasting doesn't mean you should not be drinking water. And a lot of people do find that having broth that has a little bit of salt to it is a great way to kind of mitigate some of these effects that people often have in the first 2 weeks getting into fasting. It can take a while for your body to transition into having these different eating windows and feeding fasting windows. And having a bit of broth is a good way to kind of make your body feel better. Avoid binging after your fast. This is a big one. If you're overeating as a result of fasting, you're kind of losing a lot of the purpose of it. So yeah, maybe not the diet for you then. Lifestyle considerations. If you're somebody who exercises in the morning, if you're a runner and you know your blood sugar crashes, fasting on days that you're exercising, if you know that's going to be a problem, it's just not going to be something that's realistic for you. So there's the nutritional and diabetes side. There's also the lifestyle side and making sure that this is something that fits how you want your life to look. And then my last point on hunger is hunger comes in waves. Often this is one of the more distressing sides at first, but I can promise you, hunger comes in these waves that tend to pass in 30 to 60 minutes. Have some water, have a little bit of green tea. Often it goes away quite quickly and you'll find your hunger actually disappears with time. Try and stay busy. If you are sitting on the couch at home on your weekend, just looking at the clock and waiting for your fasting to be over, it's not going to go so well. Versus if you're at work and busy with other things, it becomes significantly easier to do this. And then as a last point, low carb diets tend to make this easier, but that's a lot more to discuss. So I'm not going to delve into that any further. But if you do have questions, feel free to message me privately, and I'm happy to chat with you more about this. And then just some myths about fasting. So fasting puts you into starvation mode. No, so starvation mode refers to when your body is, depleted of nutrients, when you're breaking down protein abnormally. This doesn't occur with normal fasting. Fasting makes you overeat. It does for some people, but there's many people who successfully go through this and don't have issues with overeating. So definitely not something that you're always going to experience. Fasting causes hypoglycemia. I've touched on this a couple of times now. For some people, it's going to make your hypoglycemia worse, and this is not going to be a nutritional plan that is appropriate for you. But for many people, including myself, I found it was a lot better. So you kind of have to see person to person. Your brain requires frequent consumption of carbohydrates. So your brain actually does require carbohydrates to run, but your body has the ability to make enough for your brain's requirements. So just because you have a 16-hour period where you're not consuming carbohydrates does not mean that you're doing damage to your brain. It doesn't mean that you're putting yourself in danger. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. We're seeing more and more that just making sure you're getting enough protein, that you're getting all your nutrients, and that your diabetes is being controlled. So some people do best with having breakfast, and that's fantastic. There are so many different ways of eating, but it's not a necessary meal, and you're not going to be harming yourself if you find you're thriving without it. And fasting will make you lose weight. Again, I can't reiterate enough. If you're going into this solely with the goal of wanting to lose weight, yes, some people have success with that, but research is kind of showing again and again that there are mixed results, and some people find they are losing weight with fasting, but others are not. So set your expectations going in. So just in summary, the best way of eating is the way in which you're able to maintain your weight, control your diabetes, and feel your best. If these things are not working for you on intermittent fasting, whatever type you try, then this is not the nutritional plan for you. Fasting is just one tool that can be used, and that some have had success with, but it's not the best tool. It's not something that needs to be used for everybody's plan. So again, talk to your dietitian. They can help you decide whether this is something that's appropriate for you. And then the biggest thing is be safe. There's always more days to fast. And no matter how much you want to do it on any given day, if you're having hypoglycemia, you need to treat it. And you need to make sure you're talking about your medication with your diabetic team, because your med requirements will shift if you're fasting. And it's important that they know that you're doing this and that your meds are adjusted appropriately. I've just included a couple of links here if the slides do go up afterwards. These are extra resources, more so on type 2 diabetes population because there's not a lot out there for type 1. But if people are interested, these are excellent kind of extensive resources on it. All right.
Thank you so much, Phil, for such an informative presentation. I learned a lot about intermittent fasting, and I know all these facts. So I know if there is interest in getting the slides, I can definitely send it out to our huddlers. And I think we had a question for you in the chat. Elaine is wondering, during fasting hours, the 16-hour window, is it safe to exercise? I think you touched on it a little bit, but did you want to expand anything?
Yeah, absolutely. It's 100% safe to exercise, but my big asterisk on this is be aware of how exercise affects your body. After speaking with a number of diabetics quite extensively over the years, some people find their sugar goes up, some people stay kind of even keel, and some people their sugar drastically plummets. And this can depend. Anaerobic exercise, such as weightlifting, more often for people tends to drive sugars up, as well as HIIT is more prone to that versus, say, more cardiovascular, which will drive sugar down. So this is where knowing your own body beforehand and how you respond to a given exercise is important. But absolutely, you can exercise while fasting. That's 95% of the time how I do my exercise, unless I'm on the lower end, in which case I'll have like an apple beforehand. But yeah, yes, you can.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like we have another question in the chat from Michaela. Hi there. Thank you, Phil. Do you feel that it could impact your metabolism? I would be worried it would slow it down.
Yeah, so there's a number of great studies by Dr. Jason Fung, as well as there's a few other researchers out there that have looked at this. Often they see in shorter periods of fasting actually an increase in metabolism. There are different theories on this, and I say theories because these are proposed mechanisms as to why this might happen. But the idea is that if you look back at ancestral humans, when there were periods of deficits of food, if your metabolism ramped down and you became tired, that wouldn't be beneficial in terms of finding your next meal. So they find in the short term, and by this I mean like 12 hours to 4 days, that people's metabolism is actually increased, and then moving on beyond about the 4-day period, the metabolisms start to slow down as you deplete more resources.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess we can move on to our peer discussion section. I'm curious, has anybody here tried out intermittent fasting? Would anybody like to share their experiences? Seems like somebody's tried juice fasting.
Yeah, Cam here. I haven't done intermittent fasting per se, like focusing on it, but like my whole life, I never really liked breakfast that much, so I kind of shied away from it. And then I've been a diabetic now for I think about 3 years now. But the doctors and things suggest that you should have breakfast more often and do that sort of thing. But I'm doing that now, but I think I still would feel more comfortable kind of skipping that meal and trying to do more of an intermittent fasting diet. But you try to take their advice into consideration as well. So it's just kind of a complicated area. And on top of that, I've been having episodic nausea, vomiting episodes that don't really know what the cause of is yet. So that's another kind of issue. So just wondering what your thoughts are, because I really liked what your discussion was about, and I think I would like to kind of go back to skipping the breakfast, kind of going back to more intermittent fasting, but it's there's so many complexities with being a type 1 diabetic, especially fairly new to it. It's hard to know where to make these big decisions.
So I mean, whether or not it's appropriate for you, I can't really say without knowing, kind of your medical background more. But I'm happy you're chatting with your team about it. Whether or not you can do it kind of depends on how your body responds. Like you're describing nausea and vomiting. If that's exacerbated by the fasting, then I say it's not as good for you. But I'm saying this without knowing a whole lot about kind of your medical background here. So I would say stay in contact with your team. I do understand that most diabetic clinics do not and will not promote this, that this is something that kind of the community is doing on their own. But I guess this was kind of my intention in having this chat, which is we know people are doing it and we know people are reporting increased satisfaction on it, but they feel like they can't go to their medical team about this, that they're being just not the teaching isn't being provided. I guess I can't speak as to whether this is appropriate for you, but keep chatting with your team. I guess you can keep saying that you do feel best maybe with not having breakfast, and see if they're willing to work with you on that.
Fair enough. It's just, it's tricky. Like since I've had this condition, you talk about team, but it's like, you have a family doctor, you have an endocrinologist you see once every 8 months. So it's like, realistically, how much involvement do you have from the team? My doctor initially, had me diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic. And then, like he's failed on almost every sense of it. So it's, trust in your team. But when you don't trust in them, what do you do? And I mean, this is a loaded comment and statement, and not kind of putting you on the spot because it's not really what the discussion is about tonight. But I'm just saying it's pretty difficult to have a team and get a good response on anything of this sort of nature, I think, as you kind of indicated.
And because I don't want to get stuck on this point for too long, but I think Trish has been really fantastic with helping some of the type 1 community connect with endocrinologists that they feel they can trust and that they are getting good responses from, because it's important to feel like you can trust your nurses and your physicians. So, possibly Tricia can be a resource if you don't feel like you're getting the support you need from your current medical staff.
Thanks. Would you be able to put her contacts in the chat or something later?
Yes, for sure. I can connect you, Cameron.
Thank you.
No problem. I see Jacob has his hand up. Jacob, would you like to ask your question?
Hello. I just want to say this is great. I really enjoyed it. To echo something Cameron was saying, I feel like there's been literature for diabetes that's been built up over like 50 years. And a lot of the teams, it doesn't get updated very quickly. And that's why I like what you're saying with the intermittent fasting. It's kind of new just for the general population, much less, diabetics. I did a lot of time trying the ketogenic diet, which isn't the same, but I found that was pretty neat too. I had a question about just your thoughts on ketones. And if you're going through the ketogenic diet, theoretically, you're supposed to have ketones in your system, and just kind of how that balanced with everything.
When I had originally proposed this talk, actually, I wanted to speak on both kind of low carb diets and fasting. And Tricia said, "Well, that's too much. So you got to pick one." So my hand was forced towards one. In terms of my take, and this is really truly just my take on kind of low carb and ketosis, is that the benefits of ketosis for most people aren't great enough to justify how constrictive the diets are. Again, if it's something that you feel best on and that is not an emotional strain for you, that feels sustainable, then it may be something that is reasonable for you. If you're forcing yourself through it for I guess intended health benefits, then that's probably not right, because I think the best diets are the ones that are also sustainable, that you can do for a long period of time. In terms of health outcomes, there doesn't seem to be the evidence for actually needing to be ketogenic to have all these cardiovascular benefits, to have these reductions in cancer risk. That just moving towards a lower carb end of the spectrum tends to provide a lot of these benefits. And you can see this. You might be interested in a. There's been research put out by a clinic from California called Verta Health that just put out a two-year report on low carb diets within their population, and they're having fantastic results. But ultimately, if your diabetes if you're having worse control, if you're having more hypoglycemia, or if you feel like crap, then it's probably not right for you. But yeah, I'm a fan of the approach. I live a fairly low carb lifestyle myself, and I feel fantastic on it, and I feel like my diabetes is very well controlled in this way.
Do you bring it all the way down to like a ketosis, or do you kind of just not even pay attention to that that level?
I have done full ketogenic before. Again, I don't think, looking at, I've probably done 400 or 500 hours of research, that health benefits are kind of justified for how strict these diets are, outside of populations that a ketogenic diet might be prescribed for. And this would be like people who have seizures that are refractory to treatment. For most people, it's just overkill. And that you see a lot of the benefits, even just being on lower end of the spectrum for carbs. So yes, I've done all the way down to like a 3% carb diet. My happy spot tended to be somewhere around 15 to 20% carbohydrates in diet. But, I don't think this is an exact science. I think this is a little bit of a go with how your body feels, and go with what controls your diabetes the best.
That's great. Thank you. Actually, I have a million follow-ups, but this is really interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'm happy to speak more on it to you too, if you want to message me at another time.
That'd be cool. Yeah.
Right, it looks like Alea also has a question. Alea, did you want to go ahead and unmute?
Sure, thanks. Just to find myself a quieter space. Got the kids in the background. I guess I threw my hand up when I just heard the first kind of lead into a peer discussion about like who has had experience doing intermittent fasting. And it really did make me think that I feel very inspired hearing you talk, Phil, and thanks so much for putting thought into the presentation for this specific group and population, because I have not had experience on doing like intermittent fasting, but the only thing that I think of, I don't know if anybody else has a huge variety in their basal rates, but that's when I've done fasting, because I like want to check my basal rate, let's say for the morning period. So now I'm fasting for a good long chunk to make sure that my bolus isn't impacting that basal rate when I'm looking at it. And those moments have been really uncomfortable and stressful because I'm like hungry and thinking of food and that kind of thing. And so I felt very turned off of trying intermittent fasting because of those moments. But I think that hearing you talk, it makes me think, doing it as a one-off is not really a fair assessment of what intermittent fasting might look like. However, it makes me, I guess, also have a little bit of a question around, like in this 16 and 8 kind of time frame, is that like an everyday thing? And do you do that as an intermittent faster, or like just ongoing for most days of life? Or does that kind of go in waves as well?
There's no, I guess, straight answer for how often you should do it. I think this is where research is really lacking, and we don't, there are pockets of studies showing that there is some benefit to this, but what the prescribed diet should be, I don't think anybody has a really good grasp on what the absolute best form of it is. As I kind of said in my talk, if you're trying this out, I would say start slow. Just do like a 12-hour fasting period and see if you hate it. And if you hate it, you don't have to do this. This is no magical cure. And I think in the way that dietitians will say, intermittent fasting is a fad diet, which I don't always believe, but I do feel like these trends in everybody's got to do intermittent fasting, it's the best thing for you, is kind of the fad side of it. So if you find your body is not happy doing fasting, then that's okay that it's not your thing. People thrive with all sorts of different lifestyles, and this might not be the best thing for you. That being said, if you're interested in trying, I say just slowly dip your toes in, do like a 12-12 fast, give yourself a week. And if you feel like it's something that is working for you, then you can, narrow your eating window as you go. In terms of myself, my goal is I don't have a set time anymore that I follow. I usually eat at noon, and then again at some 4 or 5 or 6 o'clock. My intention is to have a narrow eating window, but I don't prescribe an exact amount of time. And if on any given day it doesn't work, because I'm having a low blood sugar or something, then I eat, and then the next day I just try and get back to my fasting again. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it's super helpful. Even just that brief line about, and give it a week, right? Because like I said, my experience has just been those single day, like one-offs, and just this feeling like, let's say I do a fast for a good chunk of time, even in the day, like 8 hours, just to check like a bit of daytime basal rate. And then let's say I check the basal rate and it's not going well. I have such a sinking feeling of like, oh no, I have to do the fast again, right? So I'm curious if like those hunger things, would go away and how long it might take. And I am happy with the answer of like, yeah, give it a week. A week is doable. and I'm certainly happy to listen to my body. If it is as miserable as those testing the basal rate times, then I'm not going to feel as inspired as I do now to try it. So yeah.
And that's where some people might be able to jump in and have a really easy time with fasting. Other people are going to find it more difficult. So, I had mentioned in my slides, green tea tends to be an appetite suppressant. Apple cider vinegar, which you can add to tea, or just take straight, is an appetite suppressant. I'd seen pickle juice in a lot of things mentioned. I can't imagine having some pickle juice, but apparently it works very well. So I think there are a number of tools to work around that. Even just having some broth during your fasting period. So I'd really like to drive home that fasting does not mean that you're avoiding water. You should be drinking water during this, and making sure that you're hydrated. But yeah, you have to experiment a little bit with your own body and see how you feel.
Great. Thank you, Elea. Next up, we have Dan. Hi, Dan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Phil, for the great talk. I just want to say from my own experience, the intermittent fasting combined with a low carb diet has really helped me improve my management of my blood sugars. And I guess I kind of started after reading the obesity code. You mentioned Jason Fung earlier. And so after I started that at the beginning of the year, I would say I think my overall insulin dose every day has at least been cut in half. And the obesity code kind of ties that to like insulin to weight gain and things like that. And so when I first started, it was kind of, my goal was weight loss. And while I haven't necessarily seen a lot of that, my sugars are just in control so much better. Like you kind of mentioned, when you're not dosing insulin and you're also not eating carbs, you're like, my sugars are just stable. And that's not something I would normally see before. I was always kind of on this roller coaster. And in terms of activity, I feel a lot more confident, going out for a bike ride or a walk or a hike, knowing that I don't have any insulin on board, and I also don't have, a bunch of carbs that are going to bring me too high. And so if anything, I'm more confident as I go to be active that I'm not going to have a low blood sugar, because I don't have all that insulin on board to correct for what I ate. And if I do start to slowly go down low, I can just turn off my basal on my Omnipod, which is a great tool, like for this type of management. So like if you are being active, you just turn off your basal, and then you really don't have insulin on board to worry about bringing you down, or at least that's been my experience. So like I have nothing but good things to say about that. The only struggle is sometimes it's hard to resist the temptation of carbs.
And I do think there's some amount of following what your body wants. So, as much as I follow a low carb diet and fast day to day, there are days when you can just feel your body wants some food. And I think trusting your intuitions a little bit is okay. Again, this falls outside of like a more tightly defined like scientific realm, but I think sometimes your body does want a little bit more food, and I think that's okay. And trusting your instincts on this. I'm happy you had such a good success with exercise. I think there are people who have experimented with this and it's gone horribly wrong, and their hypoglycemia has been worse. And I'm glad there are success cases like yours out there too, because I think there's so many different approaches to type 1 diabetes. And this is just, I guess, another tool that I want to communicate that I know a lot of people are doing.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, and I would say like in the way that I manage, I am lucky enough to have a dietitian on my team, and I have an endocrinologist that I see, every few months if I need to. But really, I'm kind of proud of how I've self-educated on the subject, so that I feel confident that I know how to manage my own medication in a way that's safe, because I've taken the time to like understand what's going on and do some research for myself. So, and a lot of that has been from my team. Like I've just absorbed that information like a sponge. And so I guess while it may be hard to have a good team, for like not everybody has that, I think you can always do more research and try and learn more about how your body is working as a diabetic.
Well, and maybe this is where the huddle comes in. We have amazing nurses like Jerry who are always providing great insights on different things. So, there's lots of people in your team out there. And then I think there was a few more questions in the chat. So can you expand on the 16-8 and having 2 meals and maintaining weight? Do you increase meal size for 2 meals and avoid weight loss? So generally with a time restricted eating, the goal is not necessarily a caloric deficit. Some people will additionally do that, but the main focus is just this eating window. So I tend to have 2 meals a day, and they are larger meals. So because I'm only eating twice as opposed to 3 times, they are larger meals. And this is where people will run into problems sometimes where they do 1 meal a day, because it's really, really tough to get all your nutrients, all your protein in, all your calories in just 1 meal. So if you find you are doing 2 meals a day and it's just not sufficient for your nutritional needs as directed by your dietitian, that it might not be a plan that works for you. But in general, when people will have 2 meals a day as opposed to 3, they would just eat a larger meal.
So we did have a few more questions in the chat. Phil, did you want to do like a rapid fire and answer all of those, or would you be able to stay at the end of the session to answer some of these questions?
I've got lots of time. I guess however you prefer to run this, Soraya.
Okay, wonderful. I think we can perhaps wrap up this discussion for now and come back to it at the end, just because I know Katie is here for a limited time. So we can move on to the Q&A with Katie. So as you guys may have met Katie before, she was in one of our huddles before, speaking about exercise with Calum. And I can say it's been quite the experience trying to find a dietitian to come to this talk, just because it is such a lesser talked about topic, I guess, and not all dietitians are comfortable speaking about it. So we're very, very lucky to have Katie here tonight. And I can give a brief intro about Katie. She's had type 1 for over 30 years as a patient in the BC healthcare system. She saw a lot of gaps in the healthcare system that existed for people with type 1 and a lack of available resources. And so it was this experience as a patient that drove her to leave her successful career as a newspaper journalist and become a registered dietitian, specifically to improve resources for the T1D community. And as you may have heard about in our previous episode with Katie and Caleb, Katie is an avid athlete, and you can often find her running, cycling, and hiking. She works with all aspects of type 1, and she has a passion for type 1 in sport, as well as disordered eating and type 1 in pregnancy. And if you're interested in learning about Katie, more about Katie and her services and her practice, you can visit her website at katiebartel.ca or send her an email at info@katiebartel.ca. Thank you so much, Katie, for coming tonight and joining us.
Thanks, Sarah. That was great. So full disclosure, I think I was the first dietitian to be asked to speak tonight, and I was probably the first one who said no. And now I've come back. So I'll give you a little brief overview of why I initially said no. Yes, I'm a dietitian, and I am a dietitian who works sometimes in the diabetes clinic, but I do have my own private practice, and I like to allow my clients to take the lead on where they want to go with their nutrition. I'm here to guide them, but they have the lead. I'm not going to tell you what to do. However, I am a dietitian who does not endorse diets, period. And even though there's no calorie restriction required with intermittent fasting, it does come with rules. And diets, the definition of diets, rules are part of diets. And so I think that there are some challenges when you start imposing rules and limitations and restrictions. And growing up with type 1, there were a lot of rules imposed on me personally, as I'm sure there have been on many of you. And it can affect a lot of things, not just your diabetes, but your mental health. Diets, they have been proven not to be sustainable over the long term for the vast majority of people. Oftentimes, the positive results of diets can come back and backfire. And, you know, once you stop the diet, there can be a lot of challenging negatives, like, you know, if you stop the diet, how does eating look like after? What are you going to do? Potentially you may overeat. You may, you know, start taking in a lot of the foods that you were restricting before. So then you're challenged with, you know, weight gain, poor blood sugar control, just a real disordered sense of eating. So that is, sorry, I said I would keep it brief, but I kind of went on there. That was my initial reason for not wanting to participate in this conversation. However, like I said, I do recognize that people are doing a lot of things with diabetes, and you know, I am not the side of dietitians that follow a textbook. I love trial and error with diabetes. So if you feel this is something that's right for you, there is a lot of trial and error. There is a lot of management to go with it. But I do want you to know not just the potential positives, but also the potential negatives, because there are both sides. And so I wanted to come today to just make sure that both sides were shared.
Yes, and we're so glad that you changed your mind and joined us tonight. So with that being said, I guess we can jump right in. We had a number of questions submitted for you through our online form. So first up, we have a question from Anonymous. How does intermittent fasting help you to minimize hypoglycemic episodes?
I don't know. So I saw this question come through, and Actually, I heard what Phil said, but there's no significant evidence to show that it does. There's anecdotal conversations of people saying it has helped with them. Phil is one of them. But there's no significant evidence. The research is so limited on intermittent fasting and diabetes. There's really only a handful of studies available. And as Phil mentioned, most are with a type 2 population or rodents. The duration of these studies are very short term. We don't know the long-term impacts. In one study that I read, for some people, it has in fact increased hypoglycemic incidence. 35% of this population, which was a small population to begin with, did experience a twofold increase in hypoglycemic events in a week. So for some people, it can actually increase it, but for some people, it might not, right? Everybody is different with their diabetes. So, what works for one person might not work for another. The really important thing to do is to closely monitor your blood sugars, at least 2 hours, every 2 hours, to see what are your trends doing. Are you going to, start coming down? And what are you going to do if you start coming down? Having a plan in place is always important, which we generally always do with diabetes anyway. But yeah, I think like early on, especially just knowing how your body is going to react to this change in eating, because it is a pretty big change. When there have been people, like if you have a 12-hour window, you theoretically can still eat 3 meals a day, maybe one larger meal and then gradually go down throughout the day. That's totally appropriate. But then making sure that you're giving yourself enough space between your insulin dosing so that you're not stacking insulin. If you're doing the 2 meals a day, just really seeing how your body reacts to it, because it could be very different from how someone else's does. You may have really great blood sugar management. You may have a few fluctuations early on, and it's just a matter of figuring out the dosing from that point. And I just also wanted to say there was no significance in reducing hemoglobin A1C in any of the studies either. It does show that hemoglobin A1C can be reduced, but the significance has not been shown. We do not have any randomized control trials. So that's also a challenge in showing the really good evidence.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like we need more research in this area.
Yes.
So our next question also comes from Anonymous. How does intermittent fasting affect your blood sugar levels when you exercise on those days?
I think that Phil answered a little bit, but really, again, it's person to person, right? So, it's just like when you're exercising on non-fasting days, how your blood sugars react to the exercise could be different from one person to another. It depends on the type of exercise, anaerobic versus aerobic. I think some of the really, like with any kind of exercise, there are, lots of people who don't have diabetes who do fasting just to get that to help with their performance, but it's only in training, because if you don't have good fuel sources, it can impair your performance on actual event days. But for just regular exercise, we don't really know. Like if you have, I am a proponent of aerobic exercise. You can see my bike in the background. I go for long bike rides. I am a runner. My blood sugars over the long term, if I'm not eating regularly, they're going to go low. If I'm fasting, I don't know. I've not run without eating. So I don't know how that's going to affect me. I don't know how it's going to affect you, but trial and error, monitoring, what your blood sugars are doing before exercise, what they're doing after exercise, during exercise, and, being mindful that a lot of exercise can produce a delayed hypoglycemic effect too. So, just again, knowing your body and knowing how your body reacts to exercise, knowing how your body reacts to exercise without providing it any fuel sources.
Very true. And I think Phil was emphasizing this as well, that every person's different. So it's really important to monitor how your body's reacting and following that. I also just wanted to say, if anybody has any follow-up questions or would like to ask any questions from Katie, feel free to either use the raise hand function or enter your question in the chat, and we'll try and get to your question. So next up, we have a question from Anonymous. What should people with type 1 do if somebody with type 1 who is considering doing intermittent fasting? Why should they be mindful of with respect to promoting success with fasting and doing it safely?
Yeah, I think really understanding before you even start, what are your reasons for wanting to explore intermittent fasting? Phil touched on this a little bit too, really understanding, like, is it to lose weight? There is a potential, but it's not been shown to be significant either. Is it to help manage your blood sugars? Is it for other reasons? Like, really understanding what is the purpose of this, and then looking at how it's going to fit into your lifestyle. Are there potential barriers? What would it look like in your daily life? Could you manage that? How challenging would it be to incorporate this? What are you going to be providing yourself adequate nutrition? Do you have a plan? Like, if you're going from 3 meals plus stacks to maybe 2 meals, what's your plan going to be to not overeat in that time, to get enough like energy, enough protein, and understanding why we have these various macronutrients, why our body needs them, and is this sustainable? Can you see this doing this over the long term? As I mentioned, for the vast majority of people, diets aren't sustainable. So if it is just a short-term kind of intervention, what does eating look like for you after that? How are you going to keep managing all those things that you feel this is going to help you manage better if you're not doing this? Would you enjoy food and eating if you have this time restriction in place, or would it create more stress? So I know that's not even talking about any of the diabetes things, but it is really important to look at, like, essentially interview yourself. I am a former journalist, so, ask yourself every single possible question you can ask yourself with regards to this diet to clearly understand what it's going to look like for you. And then, again, understanding that it might not be sustainable. And coming to the diabetes side of things, monitoring your blood sugars, really looking at your blood sugars closely, and, documenting from day to day, like, not even keeping it in your head, like writing it down somewhere. So you have a physical documentation to show, this is what happened to me this day. This is what my blood sugars were doing. This is how much insulin I gave. If there were any other kind of variables like stress or exercise, document that too for a few days, just to really get a clear understanding of how your body is reacting to this new change. And then the insulin dosing, yes, like I'm a dietitian, so I promote coming to see me and talking to me, but a lot of us don't. A lot of us do manage things on our own. So, having an understanding of how you're going to shift your insulin up or down, if you don't have a team in place, just really understanding what needs to be changed if you are experiencing high or low blood sugars with this.
Fantastic. Our next question comes from Anna. Do you think it's best to divide your long-lasting insulin when intermittent fasting, half dose in the morning and the rest at night?
So I can't answer this question because I don't know you and I don't know your diabetes. Potentially, it could be beneficial, but it's dependent on the person. Any kind of dosing strategy is dependent on the person. I've seen studies that had people reducing their long-acting insulin by 50% if their blood sugars were well maintained prior in those target ranges specific to them. I've also seen it reduced by 67% if they had more frequent lows prior to starting. For people on insulin pumps, it was recommended, to start at 10% and continue dialing down until you get your blood sugars in target range. I saw up to 90% reduction. So, those are going from 10% to 90%. That's a huge difference from person to person, right? So it just depends on the person. Sorry, I feel like I'm very wishy-washy with my answers, but type 1 is not a textbook disease, and we can't follow textbooks with our recommendations, which has been happening far too long.
Not wishy-washy at all. I think it's important to be safe first and foremost. So, and our last submitted question comes from Anonymous, and this is actually not about an intermittent fasting, but another kind of diet. They're wondering, is a low-carb diet okay for somebody with type 1 diabetes? For example, ideal protein diet.
Potentially. Again, I think I say potentially a lot. So any kind of diet can potentially be okay for the short term. Again, I don't endorse diets, period. But, they can be done and it is possible. But you do have to really look at what aren't you getting in that diet? What are you restricting? How important is that to your overall health? Are you losing lean mass, which, is potential? Is your focus depleting? Because that can happen with low carbohydrates. I think Phil and I will disagree on that. But it is a possibility of decreased focus, mental focus. Are you tired? Are you hungry? These are all side effects of diets and potential side effects of diets. So, potentially it can be okay over the short term. I wouldn't recommend it over the long term. But if you're not going the long term and you have all these results, what happens when you stop doing it? And I'd just like to say that I am a proponent of balanced eating and all of these positives that you can get from various diets, you can get with balanced eating, albeit it'll take a longer period of time, but it is sustainable.
Fabulous. Did anybody have any questions they wanted to ask for Katie? Feel free to jump in and unmute.
Yeah, maybe just one for Katie. I'm just interested in how you handle this person. One of the interests for me for the 16/8 and moving to 2 meals a day is the time window where I would have no insulin on board to do exercising. Right now I'm, on probably the 12/12. I would eat at 6 a.m. and then lunch and then dinner at around 6 p.m. And of course, the periods of time with no insulin on board on that kind of schedule, normal schedule, is very limited. And so what I find to kind of counteract that is I let myself go high, so that then when I am doing heavy cardio, it drops, but hopefully I get it right and it doesn't drop too far, or drops enough to kind of bring me back in range. I'm just curious, that was my main interest in the 16x8 and going to 2 meals, was having that bigger window with no insulin on board.
Fair enough, Alan. And I think that's a great question. So if you're in that 12-hour window right now, which a lot of people do eat in a 12-hour window, if you're eating breakfast at 6, when are you having lunch at?
I would say around, I of course work during the day, so I would have it around noon. And then, I finish work at 5 and would eat dinner at 6, right?
And when would you typically exercise at?
Yeah, so usually I try to push it to about 8:30 or 9 at night on weekdays. And then, of course, during the weekends, I do have a little bit more flexibility where I can try to time things, eat a later lunch or something like that.
Okay. So and I'm one of those people who is very sensitive to insulin on board. So I am that person who wakes up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday to have my breakfast, and then I am going out on the road on my bike by 9 a.m. So that I don't have that huge amount of insulin on board. So, that's one of the things that I do recommend is just, if you are highly sensitive, allowing yourself at least 3 hours from the meal to exercising. There are a lot of people with diabetes who do exercise like first thing in the morning. So, before eating, and often for some people, their blood sugars will go up first thing in the morning. So that, yeah.
Yeah, I was just agreeing. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's another strategy to work into that as well. And some people don't like breakfast, and I'm sorry, I personally don't understand that, because I just can't go without breakfast, and that's why I'm waking up at 5 a.m. to have my breakfast. But for some people, it does work, and they've found its work. They've figured out strategies to make it work. So you really have to do what's best for you. But also, if you do go down to 2 meals a day, are you going to be hungry later on? For a lot of people in the studies that I've read, when they went to the intermittent fasting, there was a decrease in the amount of foods they ate just because they had that restricted window, which some people do find a benefit, but there are, the symptoms of hunger later on. And yes, you may get past that in training your body, but how long is it going to take? Because everyone's different, and that can be, it can be a negative impact.
Yeah. That's definitely one of my concerns is as well, because even if, when I get up in the morning, if I don't eat by 6, my stomach's growling and I'm kind of, it's how do you get past that, right?
Yeah. And then, for some people, if they don't eat early, they will overeat later on. And it's not everybody, but for some people that is a risk.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think there's a hand up. Elaine? I don't know.
Yeah. Hi. I think I tried doing the intermittent fasting, and just to share some of my experience, I'm someone who doesn't like breakfast. So I've worked out a way where the 8-hour window that works for me. So I like to eat a little bit later, so I'm not hungry in the evening. So I would say I would start eating at 10 and then try to finish my meal at 6. I do find that you have to be very, very careful about your insulin and basal insulin, because there was a huge drop when I tried it the first 1 or 2 days. And I think I was asleep at the time, and it went really, really low. And then of course, it ruins the whole 8-hour and 16-hour. But I would just say, if anyone wants to try it, just be very monitor your insulin and don't give up, because it took me like a few weeks to figure out adjusting the dose. It did help me manage kind of the roller coaster on insulin. But again, like Katie, like you said, I wasn't able to last very long, because what that also meant that I needed more time to prepare bigger meals. And depending how social you are and how your lifestyle is, when your friend asks you for coffee in the morning, then you have to work around that window and schedule. But again, my purpose wasn't to lose weight. My purpose was to manage my diabetes. I did find that overall, it lowered the amount of insulin I had to take. And I would just say, go slowly, and then do it as often as you can. There will be times where you have to eat, because unfortunately it went really low. One way that I combat hunger was I try to go to sleep earlier. I'm a late night owl. Eventually I wasn't able to sustain that because I just like sleeping late. So that's just my thoughts and experience.
Thanks for sharing that, Elaine. I'm sure that's valuable to a lot of people here.
Thank you, Elaine. And I see the time is 7:30, and I know Katie has to go, but we will circle back and answer the questions in the chat that you guys had asked from Phil. But Katie, I just wanted to thank you again so much for coming tonight and joining us. It's been very, very informative, and I'm really glad we were able to get through everyone's questions for you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was good, and I'm glad I decided to come after all.
We're glad you decided that too.
All right. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
All right. So I know there were a number of questions in the chat for Phil, and Phil has kindly said that he can stay a bit over time to answer your questions. So I know Melanie was asking, Phil, is it more beneficial to do this being intermittent fasting, I guess, doing this daily, or would you still get the benefit from doing it only a few days a week?
I just want to take a little aside to, I guess, again, thank Katie. She mentioned that she was the first dietitian contacted, and then the first to decline, and she's correct in that. But I would like to say that, like, we tried to reach dietitians all across Vancouver and BC, and in general, this is not a practice that is the dietitians are interested in. So take that into consideration when you're looking at doing this, because Katie was certainly not the only one, and I think maybe that speaks to something. I'm sure they have lots and lots of wisdom to share. So reflect on that. And I thought she raised so many good points during her talk about like motivation. Why are you doing this? Is a huge part of it. Like she brought up, there are emotional changes, there are nutritional changes, and I think you need to know what your reasons are going in, because this definitely changes how you approach these things. I'm totally on board with so much of what she said. There's almost no research behind this. You're really flying blindly and using these, like she said, mouse studies and type 2 diabetic studies and piece together. So again, if you're going into this, know that, I am not an expert. I'm somebody who's read a lot on this, but there's no real expert in type 1 diabetes and fasting, because there's no research really to back any of this. And I think that's important to say. Her points on short-term diets, and that I'm again with this. I don't like when people, I'm just going to try this for a month and not try it. I think you need something that's sustainable. So if your interest is in intermittent fasting for a month, maybe don't make it your interest. Find something that will last for you a little bit longer and be sustainable. For me, this is something I can't imagine going without again, but go in with a mindset of sustainability. I think that's very important. And I'm trying not to tangent too much, but she had a lot of potential answers, and I think this is really all of medicine, right? Which is we're individual people. There's so much variation. So when she can only provide potentially this, potentially that, that's medicine. And without knowing anybody's individual background, it's impossible to provide a precise answer to a lot of these very complex questions. So thank you, Katie. I do appreciate it. And then to the question there. So is it? I think the question was, do you gain benefit from doing it every day, or? Sorry, I just want to read
Yeah.
this.
So I think Melanie was wondering if you would have to do the diet every single day to gain its benefits, or if you can still gain the benefits from doing it a couple times a week.
I guess that depends on what kind of benefits you're looking for. So, the studies that have been done on this will speak to at 12 hours, there are certain processes your body will go through that may be beneficial, and at 24 hours and at 48 hours. So again, this comes back to motivations. If your goal is good glycemic control, and that's the reason that you're going into this, then I would say, whatever days you can do it are probably a benefit if it does actually, increase your stability during fasting periods. I often don't like when people go into things and say like, okay, so I'm doing 16/8, so it has to be exactly 16/8. Life is chaotic, and if on any given day it is not working for you, you don't have to stick with it. If your friend asks you for coffee in the morning, have coffee with your friend in the morning, and then the next day, if you still feel like fasting is something you're interested in, go back to it the next day, because you've not lost the benefit by missing it for a day. The goal is sugar stability, but social health and emotional health are important too. And I think it's always a balance with these things. And Katie really spoke to this, that restrictive diets can be tough because you do lose this social side sometimes. Do you want to go out for dinner? Well, I'm not in my eating window, so I can't. So you have to really reflect on your motivations for it. But in general, I find sugar control is better with this. So you do it on the days that make sense for you. And that might be 3 or 4 days a week, or, that's going to vary person to person.
Very true. And I think Elaine also mentioned in her experience that there are those, time limits that you have to put in terms of, like you said, the social interactions. It's kind of hard to put those limits for yourself, or it can be hard. Our next question, or actually, Melanie, did you have any follow-ups to that? No? Okay. Phil's answer was perfect. So the next question is from Anna. Can it be challenging to get the carbs, nutrition, or calories you need in a shorter feeding window? If you're having to eat more in a smaller window, do you run a higher risk of lows from taking bigger insulin doses if your ICR is off?
So can you get I guess there was two parts there. So can you get your nutrition in a short eating window? I think the answer is yes. Again, as dietitians generally aren't behind this, you might hear a varied answer, but there are people that have done this for decades at a time, and they're not suffering physically. I think there's going to be some individual variation in this, and that the diet is not going to be suited for everybody. And you might be somebody who you struggle to get the nutrition in 8 hours, in which case maybe it's not appropriate for you, or you need a wider feeding window to give yourself more time. I'm somebody who can basically shovel 3,000 calories into me in a meal. So, but that's not most people. So, it'll depend on your preferences for how you like to eat, on how nutritionally dense your meals are in terms of getting all your nutrients in, on your requirements. Like, what's his name? The bodybuilder, Calais? Calum. His protein requirements are going to be higher, and there are different considerations depending on what your goals are in life. And again, I think this is where a dietitian can really help to precisely prescribe a diet that works best for you, because I think often people want one answer to a complex question, and the answer is, depending on what you want for your life and what you're doing, nutritional requirements are going to differ. And then the second part was forgetful, apparently.
The second part is, if you are having to eat more in a smaller window, do you run a higher risk of having lows when you take bigger insulin doses, if your ICR is off?
I guess in that moment for that meal, the answer would be yes. Over the course of a day, if you say had 150 grams of carbs and that was split among your 3 meals, so 50 grams, 50 grams, 50 grams, you're going to have a margin of error there if your ICR is off. So if you're having only 2 meals, 75 grams and 75 grams, you still have that same margin of error, but there's a larger amount of it all at once. So there's going to be a larger amount of error in that meal. So I suppose the answer is yes. But I guess the little asterisk to this is you have one fewer meal to screw up a day. So, for those 2 meals, the chances of you being off is higher, but also now you've only maybe messed up 2 meals instead of 3.
Always looking for the silver lining, Phil.
Right?
All right. Anna, did that answer your question? Did you have any follow-up questions?
That was great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Our next question comes from Bernie. If you're on a Medtronic pump in auto mode, then you shouldn't have to worry about adjusting your basal low. Is that right?
It's partially right. So there are limits in terms of how much the pumps are able to adjust your insulin. With Medtronic, because it can suspend your insulin, your risk for low should be significantly lower. But they do have limits in terms of how much they are able to adjust. So largely your risk of hypoglycemia should be reduced greatly on like a hybrid closed loop pump. Yes.
All right, great. And our last question is actually from Dr. Tang. Phil, what are the perspectives about intermittent fasting from the dietitians that you work with at St. Paul's and VGH?
I couldn't find anybody who was interested in talking about it. I was fortunate to have a dietitian I worked with, Sharon, who had provided other talks provided by dietitians in the US and other provinces on it. So there is talk within the community, but for the most part, I couldn't get anybody who wanted to speak with me on this. I'm not sure what to make of this because it feels like within the community that a lot of people have spoken to success with it. So I do struggle as both a person with diabetes and as an educator, saying it did good things for me. Yes, there are risks of harm, but it's hard to be type 1 diabetic and not have some amount of risk of harm. It's a pretty volatile disease. So, I found it frustrating that I could not find dietitians at either hospital who would support this or speak with me on it. I do feel like the field is growing, and I think as more research comes out, we may see people's openness to this increasing. But I do like to say it's not a diet for everybody. I hate when people kind of jump on this idea, but so intermittent fasting was good for you, so it'll definitely work for me. And the answer is probably not. Like I don't know, like it may or may not help you, and you have to individualize it to yourself. But yeah, in general, I did not find nurses or dietitians at either of the hospitals particularly open.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like there's a lot of hesitation about talking about this topic, as it is quite, I guess, controversial, and I guess people are hesitant because there isn't a lot of research out there, as you and Katie had mentioned, and so it is just on a case by case, individual basis, trying to navigate it. And I just wanted to thank you again for coming tonight and starting that discussion and starting that conversation, because I think a lot of people had a lot of questions about this topic, and it's hard to find reliable resources online. So I think it speaks a lot to your courage, Phil, for coming in and preparing all this presentation and answering all of our questions. Thank you so much again for coming tonight and spending time with us and staying overtime as well.
And I guess following up on my previous thing, when I say other people won't speak on it, I think it's very reasonable to say I'm a healthcare provider and I will speak from evidence. And I think that's a very reasonable basis. My intention going into this was people are doing it. Let's make sure people are safe. So, so many wonderful practitioners at both St. Paul's and VGH. And I'm glad people are kind of reaching out and, hopefully this was helpful for them if they are trying it.
Yes, I think it it seems like it was a very useful session. We got a lot of positive feedback in the chat. So thank you again for coming tonight. And if anyone has any questions for Phil or wants to reach him, I can potentially help connect you to Phil. Just feel free to email me or I think that's pretty much it. And also, if anybody has feedback for us for future sessions, if you have any topics you would like us to discuss, anything around type 1 care that you're interested in learning more about, feel free to let us know now, or you can always email me or Dr. Tang. Otherwise, we hope you have a very good night.
As an aside, I had spoken to wanting to maybe discuss. A lot of people do manage their diabetes with low carb as well. Anybody in the community, I guess, who's present for this, interested or practice low carb in their own diabetic practice? Would it be useful to have a talk on that as well?
Definitely. I would love to do that. I practice low carb and have done for the last 2 years and find it really beneficial. But I'd be curious to have something specific around when you're like really aggressively in ketosis versus a moderate, more like sustainable approach. So if there was something around that, I would be really interested.
Okay. I'll chat with with Tricia about this and see if we can put something together.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Have a good night.
Thank you, Soraya.
Thanks, Phil.